And we're delighted to welcome back Dr. Chris Smith, lecturer at Cambridge and managing editor of The Naked Scientist. Let's take a call from Chris in Bolton. Hello, Chris.
Dr. Rudd, good morning, and Dr. Chris,
morning.
good morning. My question is about evolution, and do we understand evolution and maybe the different forms of evolution? I can understand that if Mr. and Mrs. taller giraffes get together and start producing even taller offspring giraffes, that they can graze the upper reaches of the trees, and the giraffes with the smaller necks basically die out, and that's a simple form of evolution, so I understand that aspect. But other forms of evolution, where things decide to grow major organs, I can't quite get my head around how that form of evolution could take place. It's as though in the first case of the giraffes breeding, evolution and survival takes place by default, whereas in the case of species growing major organs, there seems to be something very deliberate, and I can't get my head around a species saying, hey, I need to grow a pair of lungs, or hey, I need a heart, or I need kidneys, or something like that. So do we understand evolution and maybe the different forms of evolution?
Hi, Chris. I think that what we do understand is that the principle of the thing, in other words, the process that drives it. What Darwin noticed was that there appeared to be many different changes or stepwise changes or manifestations which enable an organism to become highly specialist to exploit a certain environment. So if you take his finches as an example, Darwin's finches, so they're all finches, but they all have beaks which are slightly different. And if you look at the job those beaks do for those birds, the birds are all living in slightly different environments, eating slightly different foods, or dramatically different foods in some cases. And the beaks they have represent a change in structure which gives that bird the ability to exploit that environment to its best. And the way this is achieved is that slow, progressive, gradual changes are added to the beak in order to optimize the shape of that beak to the nut that that particular bird wants to eat, or the very fluffy flower that that bird wants to eat. So that's, as you say, evolution, which slowly patterns the structure of an organism so that it's best adapted to its environment. Then there are more dramatic things, and if you take, say, the invasion of the land by fish, which then became four-legged animals, tetrapods, which then crawled up onto the land, ultimately became dinosaurs, and ultimately became, obviously we're not descended from dinosaurs, but a common ancestor that turned into humans. Well, a fish didn't overnight say, I don't need these fin things, so I'm going to have some legs instead. What happened would have been, actually, if you were to zoom in at higher resolution, you would see, again, the same process of very gradual changes, which would lead to a fin becoming slightly distorted or different from being a normal fin to something that could support an animal as a limb, and that would have been driven by animals wanting to get into muddy water or to go in shallow water and support themselves, and so on. And those animals would then turn into slightly more specialised animals that were good at living in this shallow water, and then another animal that happened to have the ability to better exchange oxygen with the air rather than water would start to flourish, and slowly structures in the animals that might have originally done one job but could be parasitised, if you like, to do another job, or recruited to do another job, would then be used as well. So it's all very, very gradual changes brought about by genetic changes, mutations, which arise by chance, because when we copy our DNA, everybody listening to this programme will have made metres, if not miles, of new DNA by the time we get to the news in a minute. And the result of that is that when you're copying all that DNA, occasionally mistakes happen, and that means mistakes also happen when you're making your gametes, sperm and eggs. And so if you make mistakes, some of those mistakes are going to be bad news, they're going to do bad things to you, but some of those mistakes may change you very subtly in a way which is beneficial. And the consequence of that is that you then do slightly better than the other people around you. You're slightly fitter, slightly healthier, you're slightly better able to access food, and so those genetic changes are inherited. And so I think we probably do understand the principles. That's not to say we know every example of how evolution happened, and we certainly don't have all the gaps filled in to explain how we got here today. And that's what the fossil record is slowly telling us over time.
Yeah, there seems to be... The problem I've got is that, and I appreciate the examples you've given, familiar with the finches with the different types of beaks, but there seems to be a sort of deliberateness in it. Whereas in the example I gave of the giraffes breeding and those with the taller necks survive because the others can't reach the food, so that's a pretty simple form of evolution. I mean, the idea that one finch sort of says, "Hey, listen, I need a bigger beak to be able to crack these bigger nuts," and like I say, something needs a smaller beak to get into flowers. That sort of deliberateness, that I have a problem with coming to terms with that, unless you're saying that it's solely down to sort of genetic mutation.
It's a bit of both. What's going on, Chris, is that you've got a group of birds who are the ancestors of today's Darwin's finches, and they're all competing with each other to eat whatever's available. And then some of them will have slightly different beaks, which means that in this area over here, in this sort of geographical area, where there are these hard foods that they would normally have ignored, they can eat those as well as competing on the other foods. And because they're now getting more food than the other guys, they're breeding better. So more of those different kinds of beaks crop up in that group of birds. And eventually, because they become so specialised at just exploiting that food source, they start ignoring the other food source, and as a result they get very, very specialised just into that food source. So it's a very gentle change which is acquired over time.